The House on Ashgrove Lane Part 1. You don't notice the little things when you're desperate for a cheap place to stay. At least, not at first. That's what Erin kept telling herself as the Toyota's GPS guided them down the sloping, tree-choked lane, its cracked pavement buckling with roots that looked like knuckled fingers breaking through the skin of the earth. The Airbnb listing had called it a charming colonial getaway on historic Ashgrove Lane, but standing at the wheel with the dusk bleeding down into night, it looked more like the kind of place where you'd expect to see a police cruiser idling out front, lights painting the trees red and blue, tape flapping across the porch. Erin's boyfriend, Matt, leaned forward in his seat, squinting through the windshield like if he stared hard enough, the sagging roof and crooked shutters might straighten up, the place suddenly transforming into the sunlit, wide-angled photographs they'd scrolled through online. But the reality was this. The house hunched against the tree-lean, windows dark, the porch tilted like it had been punched in the gut. Erin thought she saw something move behind the curtains upstairs. Just a flick, the kind of shadow you can excuse as imagination, but her skin prickled cold anyway. The air smelled of damp leaves and wood smoke, though no chimneys were lit. It was too quiet, the kind of quiet that isn't natural, as though the birds and crickets and all the little nighttime things had packed up and gone someplace safer. And yet, here they were, two strangers from the city with backpacks full of clothes, convinced by glossy photos and 5-star reviews that this was a hidden gem. Erin found herself clutching her phone harder than necessary, her thumb hovering over the app, the urge to cancel pounding louder than her heart. But Matt gave her that look, the one that said don't start, we need this, and she swallowed the unease like a bitter pill. They'd already driven 6 hours. Money was tight. You don't walk away from a deal this good. She would come to understand, much too late, that bargains always have a price, and the house on Ashgrove Lane had been waiting, patient and hollow-eyed, for guests just like them. The host's name was Gerald, though on the listing he called himself Jerry, like he was trying too hard to be your friendly uncle who cracked corny jokes at Thanksgiving. He greeted them on the porch with a smile that showed too much gum, his thin gray hair pasted back as if he'd used spit instead of gel. You made it, he said, as though he hadn't been sure they would. His voice was smooth in a way that suggested he'd practiced it, like a salesman who'd memorized the pitch but hadn't quite nailed the human parts in between. He shook Matt's hand too long, pumped it once, twice, 3 times, and then gave Erin a glance that wasn't quite a look, but lingered just enough to send a hot ripple of discomfort down her arms. His eyes were pale, the kind of pale that's almost colorless, like glass marbles fogged with breath. Place has been in the family for a long time, he said, gesturing to the house behind him. Needs a little love, but it'll treat you right. Everybody says so. Erin wanted to ask everybody who, but her tongue felt heavy, and she just nodded instead. Inside, the house smelled of cedar polish layered over something else, something that reminded her of the biology lab in high school, where frogs floated in jars, their little limbs splayed stiffly in yellow liquid. The air felt too thick, as if it had been breathed in and out too many times without ever being let go. The furniture looked like it had been borrowed from dead relatives. Heavy wingback chairs with fabric rubbed shiny at the arms, a grandfather clock whose hands ticked but never moved forward, lace curtains that seemed to twitch with drafts that never touched her skin. "You're my only guests this weekend," Gerald said cheerfully, though his eyes didn't quite match the tone, "so you'll have the whole place to yourselves." Erin wanted to smile, to thank him, to play the part of the polite guest, but what came out instead was a tight little "oh," as though her brain had forgotten the script. Later, when she thought back on it, she would remember how the house seemed to listen, how the floorboards sighed as she stepped across them, how every photograph on the wall showed people she didn't know smiling with teeth that were just a little too sharp. But in the moment, she told herself it was fine. People lived in old houses all the time. People rented them out for a little extra cash. Nothing wrong with that. And yet, as Gerald handed them the key, a long, black iron thing that looked like it belonged to a dungeon instead of a modern lock, he leaned just close enough for Erin to smell his breath, metallic and sweet, like pennies dissolved in syrup. "You'll be safe here," he whispered. "Long as you don't go wandering after midnight." They unpacked in the upstairs bedroom, the one Gerald had cheerfully described as the coziest room in the house. Cozy was one word for it, though Aaron's mind supplied others. Cramped, airless, suffocating. The sloped ceiling pressed down low enough that Matt cracked his head on a rafter while dragging the suitcase to the bed. The wallpaper was yellowed with water stains that spread like bruises, and the only window looked out into a forest so dense the trees seemed to push against the glass, their branches scratching faintly when the wind shifted. Aaron tried to laugh about it, tried to say something like, "Well, it's not the Ritz, but it'll do," but her voice sounded small, eaten by the walls. There was a wardrobe in the corner, tall and too narrow, its mirror warped with age. She noticed her reflection lagged behind her movements by a split second, a trick of old glass, she told herself, but it left her skin crawling. The bed was soft, almost too soft, the mattress sagging toward the middle like it had held too many bodies for too long. Aaron pressed her hand into the sheets and thought, absurdly, that the warmth she felt there wasn't from the sun or the radiator, but from something that had been lying in that exact spot, just moments before. She didn't tell Matt. He was already irritated, muttering about the Wi-Fi not connecting, waving his phone around like a divining rod, hunting for signal. She sat on the edge of the bed, her backpack in her lap like a life preserver, and listened. Houses have sounds, everyone knows that. Pipes clank, floors creak, wind whines under the eaves. But this house had a heartbeat. She could hear it if she held still, a faint, rhythmic thud behind the plaster, steady as her own pulse but louder, deeper, as if the walls themselves had veins. She shook it off, stood, and pulled the curtains closed. When she turned back, the wardrobe's mirror showed not her own face but the bedroom door, only it was open in the reflection and closed in reality. She blinked, and it was normal again, just her, pale and jittery, staring back. "Long drive," she muttered to herself, forcing a smile she didn't feel. "I'm just tired." But somewhere in the dark ribs of the house, something shifted, and Aaron had the sudden, sickening certainty that it had been tired too, tired of waiting. Dinner that night was Chinese takeout from the only open place in town, cartons spread across the coffee table in the living room while the old grandfather clock clicked its useless tongue in the corner. Matt ate with the distracted air of someone whose mind was already 3 steps ahead, scrolling through his phone, complaining that the Wi-Fi was slower than dial-up. Aaron picked at her food, appetite dulled by the oppressive silence of the house. The TV worked, though only half the channels came in, and the static hiss between stations seemed louder than it should have been, like a storm trying to crawl through the screen. "This is fine," Matt said around a mouthful of noodles, his voice too bright, like he was trying to convince them both. Aaron nodded, but her eyes kept drifting to the hallway where the shadows pooled thicker than the rest of the room. Every now and then, she thought she saw movement there, a figure leaning just past the doorframe, watching with infinite patience. But when she blinked, it was gone. After dinner, Gerald appeared again, sudden as a nightmare, his knock a soft rap on the front door that sent Aaron's heart leaping. "Just checking in," he said when Matt opened the door, his grin as wide and strange as before. "Make sure you two are settling in all right." Matt assured him they were fine, thanks, though his tone carried a brittle edge of annoyance. Aaron, though, couldn't shake the way Gerald's eyes slid past them into the house, scanning the corners like a man counting heads. "You'll want to keep the windows shut tonight," Gerald added, voice lowering. "Things in the woods get curious after dark." Then he was gone, disappearing down the porch steps with the soft shuffle of slippers, leaving behind only that odd sweetness in the air, pennies and syrup, clinging to the doorway like a ghost of his breath. Aaron locked the door immediately, sliding the bolt home with a satisfying click. But as she turned, she froze. The cartons from dinner, they weren't where she had left them. The noodles she'd barely touched were gone, the chopsticks resting neatly across an empty box as though someone had finished the meal for her. Matt swore she was imagining things, that she must have eaten more than she thought, but Aaron knew better. She could still taste the metallic tang of someone else's hunger in the air. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Matt was out within minutes, sprawled diagonally across the sagging mattress, snoring softly into the pillow like he had no trouble closing his eyes in a stranger's house. Erin lay awake, staring at the ceiling where water stains formed shapes that seemed to shift if she watched too long. Faces, mostly wide-eyed and hollow-cheeked, their mouths warped into perfect little O's of terror. She turned onto her side, clutching her phone though the screen had long since gone dark, the spinning wheel of no signal mocking her. Somewhere below, the house groaned, a sound too deliberate to be blamed on settling wood. She listened harder, holding her breath, and realized it was footsteps. Slow, measured, dragging steps across the first-floor hallway. Her first instinct was Matt. Maybe he'd gotten up for water, but the warmth of his body pressed against her leg under the covers told her otherwise. The steps continued, up the staircase now, each board creaking in steady rhythm. Erin's chest tightened. She wanted to wake Matt, shake him, whisper his name sharp enough to slice through his sleep, but she didn't. She couldn't. It was as if the house itself pressed down on her, daring her to move. The steps stopped outside their door. Silence swelled thick as molasses. Erin's heart beat so loudly she thought it might give her away. Then came the sound, a key sliding into the lock. She swore she heard it scrape, the tumblers shifting like bones popping into place. But the door never opened. Instead, after an eternity of silence, the sound retreated, the same dragging rhythm echoing down the hall, back to the stairs, fading away. She lay frozen until dawn, her body buzzing with exhaustion and fear, and when morning finally came, Matt laughed at her story. "Old houses make noises," he said, ruffling her hair like she was a child who'd had a bad dream. Erin didn't argue. She only stared at the door, at the keyhole black as an open eye, and wondered who else had keys. The morning light did little to soften the house's strangeness. If anything, it only made the flaws sharper. The wallpaper peeling like old scabs, the warped floorboards bending inward as though something heavy had walked them for centuries, the smell of cedar polish failing to hide that sweet, rotting undertone. Erin brewed coffee in the narrow kitchen, its appliances decades out of date, their enamel chipped like cracked teeth. She carried 2 mugs into the living room, where Matt was scrolling through his phone with mounting frustration. "Still nothing," he muttered. "It's like this place is in a dead zone." Erin only nodded, too tired to argue. She set his mug down and noticed something on the coffee table, a leather-bound book she swore hadn't been there the night before. It was thick, cracked with age, its corners darkened as though it had been handled too often. No title on the cover, just the faded imprint of what might once have been gold lettering, now worn away. She picked it up, hesitating. The weight of it felt wrong, heavier than it should have been, and warm, like it had been resting in someone's lap. "Where'd you find this?" she asked. Matt glanced up, distracted. "What book?" She turned the cover toward him, but his brows pinched in confusion. "I don't see anything." Erin froze, the leather cool and real under her fingertips, but Matt's eyes slid past as if she were holding nothing at all. Heart pounding, she sat down and opened it. Inside, the pages were filled with neat, slanted handwriting, lines pressed so hard the ink had bled through in places. The first entries were normal enough. Travelers writing about their stays, comments like "lovely home," "slept like a baby," 5 stars. But as the pages went on, the tone shifted. Guests began describing strange events. Footsteps in the halls, whispers through the vents, a cold hand brushing their legs under the covers. One entry ended abruptly with the words "he's at the door again." The next page was stained, the ink smeared as if someone had written in haste, and then nothing. Erin's throat tightened. She flipped further, scanning for dates. The entries stretched back decades, long before Airbnb even existed. And the names, so many names, none of which appeared in the online reviews. She snapped the book shut, pulse hammering. "Matt," she whispered, "we need to leave." But when she looked up, he was staring at her with a blank expression, his phone forgotten in his hand. Leave? He repeated, his voice flat, distant. Why would we leave? We just got here. Erin spent the rest of the morning trying to convince herself she was overreacting. The brain does strange things when it's starved for sleep, she reasoned. It invents shadows, magnifies creaks, turns coincidence into omen. She repeated this silently, like a mantra, while Matt busied himself outside, poking at the car engine because it had stalled the moment he tried to start it. Erin wandered through the house, sunlight angling through the dusty windows in thick, golden bars. Dust motes spun in the beams like tiny planets caught in orbit, and for a brief moment she almost believed everything was normal. But then she noticed the photograph. There were dozens of them, lining the walls of the narrow hallway that led to the back door. Families mostly, standing stiffly on the porch steps or in the parlor, their smiles stretched too wide, their eyes flat as marbles. Some were black and white, the corners curled and yellow. Others looked more recent, their colors bleeding faintly like bad Polaroid. The strange thing, the thing that made her stop, her stomach hollowing with dread, was that the wallpaper behind them was the same as the wallpaper on the walls now. Not just the same pattern. The same peeling corners, the same water stains. As if the photographs had been taken in this exact house, year after year, decade after decade, and nothing had changed but the faces. Erin leaned closer to one photo near the end of the hall. It showed a young couple, their arms around each other, grinning. Something about their expressions snagged her attention. The smiles didn't reach their eyes. And behind them, through the warped glass of the window, a faint outline of a man stood watching. Her breath caught. She stepped back, colliding with the wall, her heart galloping. A floorboard creaked above her head. Slowly, stiffly, she tilted her gaze upward. The ceiling groaned again. Someone was walking across the upstairs hallway, though Matt was still outside, cursing at the Toyota. Erin swallowed hard, every instinct in her screaming get out. She turned for the door, hand clutching the knob, but it wouldn't budge. She twisted it harder, rattling it in its frame, panic rising in her throat. That was when she heard it. A whisper, low and hoarse, coming from the other side of the wood. Just one word, stretched into a hiss that raised every hair on her body. Stay. When Matt finally came back inside, wiping grease from his hands, Erin was sitting rigidly on the couch, her eyes locked on the front door as though sheer willpower might hold it closed. She didn't tell him about the whisper. She didn't have the words for it yet, and besides, he was already irritated, muttering that the car wouldn't turn over, that the engine was fine but something electrical had fried. We're stuck here for now, he said, tossing the rag onto the arm of the couch. Relax, it's just a couple nights. Erin almost laughed at that, a sharp, hysterical bark she swallowed back down. Instead, she told him about the photographs, about the faces on the walls, the man in the window. Matt brushed it off, said old houses were bound to have weird portraits, that she was reading too much into things. But when she led him into the hallway, pointed directly at the couple she'd seen, the man in the background, he squinted, frowned, then shook his head. I don't see anything, Erin. Just two happy people. She wanted to scream, to shake him until his teeth rattled. Instead, she pressed her lips tight and turned away, a hot tear slipping free. That night the storm came. Thunder rattled the window panes, lightning forked across the forest outside, illuminating the trees like skeletons frozen mid-dance. Rain hammered the roof, the gutters gurgling like a drowning throat. Erin lay awake again, heart pounding, every nerve screaming with the certainty that the house was awake, too, listening, waiting. Sometime past midnight, she heard it, the scrape of the iron key sliding into their bedroom door. Her blood turned to ice. She bolted upright, shaking Matt violently this time. Listen, she hissed. But he only blinked at her sleepily, muttering, What are you talking about? The scraping stopped, silence swelling thick as tar. Erin strained to hear, every muscle rigid, and then, ever so softly, the whisper came again. Not from behind the door this time, but from the wardrobe in the corner. A voice like dry leaves rubbing together, a voice that didn't belong to any living thing. Stay. Lightning flashed, throwing the room into white relief. For a split second, Aaron saw the wardrobe door cracked open, and inside, the pale oval of a face grinning at her with teeth too many to count. Darkness swallowed it before she could even scream. When she flicked on the lamp, the wardrobe stood closed, silent, ordinary. Matt groaned, rolled over, already half asleep again. Aaron sat there, staring at the door, the wardrobe, the black eye of the keyhole, until dawn bled gray and thin through the tree. Part 2. The last review morning arrived gray and dripping, the storm's leftovers clinging to the trees like wet shrouds. Aaron sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone cold, staring at the leather-bound book she had shoved into her backpack during the night. Matt was outside again, trying to get a signal on his phone, pacing the driveway like a man waiting for a verdict. Aaron hadn't told him she still heard the voice. Hadn't told him that when she finally drifted off just before dawn, she dreamed of the wardrobe door creaking open and a procession of pale, smiling guests filing silently into the bedroom, one after another, their bare feet leaving no prints on the floorboards. She'd woken with the smell of cedar polish, and something rancor filling her nose, her skin clammy as if she'd been touched. Now, in the cold morning light, she opened the book again. The entries had changed. She swore on her own life they had. Where last night's scrawl had ended mid-sentence, now a new line trailed across the page, written in the same desperate hand. He came through the wardrobe. Aaron's stomach plummeted. She flipped frantically, pages whispering like dry leaves. More words had appeared, jagged and slanted, ink so fresh it smudged beneath her fingertips. If you're reading this, it means he's chosen you. Don't stay past the second night. She snapped the book shut, bile burning her throat. 2 nights. That meant tonight. The house creaked around her as if it understood. As if it agreed. She shoved the book deeper into her backpack, heart hammering. Then Matt burst back inside, cursing, rain dripping from his hair. Nothing, he growled, throwing his useless phone onto the counter. It's like we're cut off from the entire world. He didn't notice her shaking hands, the way she clutched the bag like a shield. He didn't notice the way the kitchen clock ticked irregularly, skipping beats like a faltering heart. But Aaron did. And deep down, in the place she didn't dare put into words, she already knew the truth. The house wasn't just keeping them in. It was feeding on the weight. By noon, Matt had decided they were overreacting. Or rather, Aaron was overreacting, and he was tired of humoring it. We've got food, we've got a roof over our heads, and the car'll start once the weather clears, he said, sprawled on the couch with his feet kicked up like he owned the place. Aaron wanted to scream. How could he not feel it? The heaviness in the air, the way the walls seemed to lean closer if you sat too long in one spot, the faint hum that trembled through the floorboards as if the house itself were breathing. She tried to show him the book again, but when she opened it to the fresh warnings, the pages were blank. Just empty, yellowed parchment. Matt laughed, told her she needed sleep, maybe less caffeine. Aaron almost threw the mug at his head. Instead, she stalked off to the hallway lined with photographs. She couldn't help herself, she had to look again. The faces hadn't changed, not exactly, but there was something new. A couple she hadn't noticed before stood smiling stiffly from the porch, their clothes modern, their haircuts familiar. Aaron's blood ran cold as she leaned closer. It was them. Her and Matt. The smiles were wrong, stretched puppet-wide, their eyes dull as painted marbles. She staggered back, slamming her shoulder into the wall, and the whole house seemed to shiver around her like a great beast rolling in its sleep. "Matt!" she called, her voice cracking. He appeared in the hallway, irritation painted across his face, but when she pointed, the photo showed only strangers again, some long-forgotten couple in dated clothes, grinning at nothing. "Jesus, Aaron," Matt snapped. "You're seeing things. You've been seeing things since we got here." His words cut, but worse was the way he didn't notice that the glass in the photo had fogged from the inside, as though someone's breath still lingered there. Aaron swallowed her terror and said nothing. She didn't want to fight. Not when she could feel eyes on her from every shadow, not when she could hear faint laughter echoing through the vents, high-pitched, childlike, and cruel. That evening Gerald returned. Erin heard his knock first, 3 polite taps on the door that somehow rattled through her bones like a summons. Matt answered this time, still clinging to irritation instead of fear. Gerald stood on the porch, hat in hand, his thin hair plastered damp against his skull from the rain. His smile was wide, too wide, gums pale as chalk. "Storm's been rough," he said, voice smooth and low. "Thought I'd check in, make sure you two had everything you need." Erin hovered behind Matt, gooseflesh crawling up her arms. She wanted to slam the door, to bolt it, but Matt only nodded and muttered something about the car not starting. Gerald's eyes flicked to Erin then, pale and colorless, and for a moment she swore she saw a second face reflected inside them, a pale oval grinning in the glass of his pupils. "Cars can be tricky," he said softly. "Best not to go out tonight. Woods get restless when the wind's high." Erin's throat closed. It was the same phrase he'd used before, but this time his tone was hungrier, less like advice and more like command. Matt said something flippant, but Erin barely heard it. Her eyes were on Gerald's hands. They were clean, perfectly clean, except for the faint line of soil under each nail, as though he'd been digging. Gerald's gaze lingered too long, then he tipped his hat, turned, and walked off into the rain. Erin stared after him until he vanished among the trees, though she could still hear his footsteps long after. "I don't like him," she whispered once the door was closed. Matt rolled his eyes. "Weird old guy in a weird old house. Big deal." But later, when she climbed the stairs alone, Erin glanced out the landing window. The driveway was empty. Gerald hadn't walked toward the road at all. He had gone into the woods, and in the lightning flash that split the sky, she thought she saw him standing among the trees, perfectly still, staring up at the house as if waiting for it to open its jaws. Night dropped hard, the kind of night that swallows light whole. The storm had passed, but the woods outside seemed darker for it, their branches clawing against the windows like skeletal hands. Matt had finally given up on the car, and was nursing a beer he'd found in the fridge, its label so faded Erin doubted it had been brewed in this decade. She sat across from him, the leather-bound book hidden in her lap, her fingers tracing the edge of its cover like a worry stone. She hadn't meant to open it again, but something about the silence pressed her, urged her, and when Matt got up to use the bathroom, she cracked it open. This time, there was no mistaking it. A fresh entry covered the most recent page in jagged strokes of ink. "Second night is the worst. Don't look in the mirrors. Don't trust the man who calls himself Gerald. Don't." The words cut off, a dark smear trailing down the paper like blood instead of ink. Erin snapped the book shut, her hands trembling. Her reflection in the window glass stared back at her, pale and wild-eyed, but then, her heart froze, it blinked wrong. Not with her. A fraction too slow. And when she whipped around, there was no one behind her, just the empty living room, the grandfather clock's hands still stubbornly frozen at midnight. She ran to Matt, blurting out everything, the voices, the photographs, the book, Gerald's strange visits. But he only shook his head, exhaustion carving deep lines in his face. "You need to calm down," he said firmly, placing his hands on her shoulders. "We just have to get through one more night. Then we'll figure something out." Erin wanted to believe him. She wanted his words to wrap around her like a blanket. But as the house groaned above them, as the wardrobe door in their room creaked faintly open without a hand on it, she knew Matt was wrong. They didn't need to get through one more night. They needed to get out, now. Sleep was impossible. Erin lay wide-eyed in the upstairs bedroom, the warped ceiling pressing down on her like a lid. Matt's breathing beside her was steady, almost unnaturally steady, like the mechanical rhythm of something pretending to be human. She told herself she was imagining it, that she was wound too tight, but when she leaned close enough to feel the warmth of his breath, she swore the air smelled faintly of soil, damp and cloying, the scent Gerald had carried with him. She pulled back, heart hammering. The wardrobe creaked again, just as it had earlier. Only now, in the deep dark, it sounded less like settling wood and more like hinges easing open with purpose. Erin clutched the blanket to her chin, her eyes locked on the sliver of black between the doors. Something moved inside, a shuffle, a whisper, the softest scrape of fingernails against wood. "Matt," she hissed, shaking him. He grunted, half asleep. "Do you hear that?" she whispered urgently. But Matt only turned over, his back to her, leaving her to face the wardrobe alone. She slid out of bed on shaking legs, every instinct screaming at her not to look, not to confirm. Still, she crept forward, her toes brushing against the warped floorboards. The smell hit her first. Rot, copper, something wet and alive. And then, as she reached for the handles, the wardrobe doors swung wide on their own. Inside, there were no clothes, no shelves, just depth. Endless, yawning depth, like the woods themselves had tunneled through the house. A figure stood far back, pale and still, its grin wide enough to split its face. Erin gasped, stumbling backward, and the doors slammed shut so hard the walls shook. Matt bolted upright. "What the hell are you doing?" he snapped, but Erin couldn't answer. She could still see that face when she closed her eyes. The next morning should have brought relief, but the daylight that seeped through the curtains was weak, watery, more like diluted ash than sun. Erin hadn't slept. Every time her eyes closed, she saw that gaping wardrobe, that grinning figure, and worse, the faint outline of other faces behind it, blurred and waiting like passengers crowded into a train car. Matt tried to laugh it off, though his eyes were shadowed with sleeplessness. Bad dream. That's all. He busied himself in the kitchen, frying eggs that smelled faintly of sulfur as they hit the pan. Erin couldn't eat. She sat at the table, the leather-bound guestbook lying between them like a silent witness. "Read it," she demanded, her voice sharper than she intended. Matt sighed, but when she pushed the book toward him, he opened it. His eyes tracked the ink. His expression changed, shifting from irritation to confusion, then finally to something Erin had never seen on his face before: fear. "It wasn't here last night," he muttered, pointing at the page. The entry had grown since Erin last saw it. Beneath the jagged words, "Don't trust the man who calls himself Gerald," there was now a list of names. Dozens of them, scrawled one under another in desperate handwriting, some smudged, some incomplete. Erin's stomach turned as she read them. Each name had a date beside it. Some were from decades ago, others recent. And the last one, the ink so fresh it glistened, was hers. Erin Hayes, August 2023. Her breath caught in her throat. "Where's mine?" Matt whispered, flipping frantically through the pages. But there was no Matt. Only her. Just her. As if the house had already decided who it wanted. Outside, the woods stirred though there was no wind. The branches tapped against the windows in a rhythm, not random but deliberate, like fingers drumming impatiently on glass. Erin slammed the book shut, her skin crawling. "We need to leave," she said. But when she glanced at Matt, he wasn't looking at her anymore. His eyes were fixed on the mirror over the stove. Erin followed his gaze. For a split second she saw herself standing there beside him, but her reflection was smiling, lips stretched wide, teeth too many, too sharp. The mirror cracked that afternoon. Not shattered, not broken in any natural way, but cracked with a single sharp line that split Erin's face in two when she glanced at it. Matt insisted it was the house shifting again, the old beams warping, but Erin knew better. Something inside was watching them, testing the edges of their reality like a caged animal pressing against bars. They tried to distract themselves, packing their bags, pacing the kitchen, checking the driveway every few minutes in the hope someone might pass who could give them a ride. But the road beyond the trees remained empty, too still, as though cut off from the rest of the world. Around noon, Gerald returned. No knock this time, no polite smile. He simply appeared at the doorway, his clothes pressed, his hair slicked, his shoes leaving no mud despite the swampy yard. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, voice soft but edged with amusement. Matt stepped forward, chest puffed with false bravery, but Aaron grabbed his arm. Something in Gerald's eyes, too black, too deep, made her blood run cold. The storm cleared the roads, Gerald continued, folding his hands behind his back. You'll find your way out when the house is ready. Aaron's voice cracked. What does that mean? Gerald tilted his head, like a teacher humoring a child. It means, he said slowly, that some guests leave. Some don't. The house keeps what it needs. His grin widened, and for the first time Aaron saw his teeth. They weren't human, not all of them. Some were too long, needle-thin, glinting like pins. She staggered back, and when she blinked, he was gone. No door creak, no footsteps. Just gone, leaving the faint smell of damp earth and something metallic, like rust or blood. The grandfather clock in the hall groaned once, its hands twitching forward a single minute. 12:01. Aaron couldn't breathe. It was as if midnight hadn't ended, only stretched, bleeding across every hour of the day. That night, Aaron refused to sleep. She sat in the kitchen with every light blazing, the guest book clutched in her lap, her suitcase by the door. Matt hovered nearby, pacing like a restless dog, muttering half-formed plans. The woods outside had grown louder, branches scraping the siding, something heavier moving just beyond the porch, too big for a deer, too deliberate for the wind. At midnight, the grandfather clock in the hall chimed once. Only once. But the sound lingered, reverberating through the house like a bell tolling for the dead. The wardrobe upstairs creaked. The bathroom pipes groaned. And then, knocking. Slow, deliberate, at the back door. Aaron froze. The knocking came again, steady as a heartbeat. Matt grabbed a kitchen knife, his knuckles white, and edged toward the sound. Aaron wanted to scream at him to stop, but her throat had closed. He flung the door open, and no one stood there. Just the woods, black and endless, breathing. A gust of damp air blew inside, carrying with it the scent of rot and something sweet, cloying, like lilies left too long in water. Matt slammed the door, but when he turned back, Aaron wasn't in the chair anymore. At least, not the Aaron he knew. She was standing rigid, the guest book still clutched in her hands, her eyes wide and unblinking. It wrote my name again, she whispered. Her voice wasn't hers. It was layered, dozens of voices speaking in chorus. She turned the book around. Matt staggered back. Every page was filled with her name now, scrawled over and over in black ink, smearing, dripping like blood. And in the middle of the last page, written in neat, elegant script, were the words, "The house has chosen." The lights flickered, then went out, plunging them into blackness. Matt lunged forward, but Aaron, or whatever wore her face, was already gone, the book dropping to the floor with a heavy thud. From the darkness upstairs came the slam of wardrobe doors opening wide, followed by laughter. Not human laughter. Laughter that echoed from every wall, every pipe, every floorboard, rising until the house itself seemed to be laughing. Matt stumbled into the black, knife trembling in his hand, as the house swallowed him whole.